The research station on Kepler 442b hummed with activity as the morning shift began. Marcus Chin pushed his cleaning cart down the sterile corridors, the wheels squeaking softly against the polished metal floors. He had been working as a maintenance technician on this remote xenobiology research facility for 3 years now, and the routine had become second nature to him. The station housed researchers from 12 different species, all studying the unique ecosystem of this frozen world. Most of the alien crew members barely acknowledged Marcus's existence. To them, he was just another human doing menial labor, invisible and unremarkable. The Zephyrians with their crystalline skin looked through him as if he were transparent. The Vorthan scientists, with their multiple arms and superior intellects, dismissed him with barely concealed disdain. Even the peaceful Mel Lowry treated him like a piece of furniture that occasionally moved. Marcus didn't mind the isolation. He found peace in his work, methodically cleaning and maintaining the equipment that kept everyone alive on this hostile world. The planet's surface was a wasteland of ice and howling winds, where temperatures could drop to minus 60 degrees Celsius during the frequent storms. The research station was humanity's first major contribution to the Galactic Scientific Consortium, and Marcus took quiet pride in keeping it running smoothly. On this particular morning, Marcus was assigned to clean the restricted xenobiology labs in Section C. These labs housed specimens from various worlds, most of them in carefully controlled environments. As he approached Lab C7, he noticed something unusual. The environmental warning light was flashing amber instead of its usual steady green. Marcus checked his tablet. Lab C7 contained juvenile specimens of Kythera, a species of apex predators from the jungle world of Thesha Prime. The lab's climate control system was designed to maintain the warm, humid conditions the young predators needed to survive. But, according to his readings, the temperature had dropped significantly during the night. He accessed the lab's entry protocol and stepped inside. The humid warmth that usually greeted him was replaced by an uncomfortable chill. Marcus frowned as he examined the climate control panel. The heating unit had malfunctioned, and the backup systems hadn't kicked in properly. The temperature inside the lab had fallen to just above freezing. In the far corner of the lab, Marcus spotted movement. 3 Kythera cubs, each about the size of a house cat but, with the lean build of natural hunters, were huddled together in their enclosure. Their normally vibrant purple and gold fur looked dull, and they were shivering violently. One of the cubs, smaller than the others, was barely moving. Marcus had read about Kythera in the station's database. Adult Kythera stood nearly 3 meters tall and were among the most feared predators in known space. They possessed incredible strength, lightning-fast reflexes, and an intelligence that rivaled most sentient species. Their claws could cut through steel, and their bite could crush bone. But these were just babies, and they were dying from the cold. The smallest cub looked up at Marcus with large, amber eyes that seemed far too intelligent for such a young creature. Its siblings pressed closer to it, trying to share their diminishing body heat. Marcus felt something twist in his chest as he watched the tiny predators struggle against the cold that was slowly killing them. Without thinking, Marcus began to remove his heavy maintenance jacket. The thick, insulated coat was designed to keep humans warm during emergency repairs in the station's unheated sections. It was regulation issue, navy blue with reflective safety strips and multiple pockets for tools. "Easy there, little ones," Marcus whispered as he approached the enclosure. The cubs' ears flattened against their heads, and low growls rumbled in their throats. Even dying from hypothermia, their predator instincts remained sharp. But Marcus moved slowly and kept his voice calm. "I'm not going to hurt you." He carefully opened the enclosure's access panel and gently placed his jacket inside. The cubs immediately scrambled away from the strange object, pressing themselves against the far wall of their habitat. But the smallest cub, the one who had looked at him with those knowing eyes, took a tentative step forward. The cub sniffed the jacket cautiously, its small nose twitching as it processed the unfamiliar scents. Marcus held his breath, not wanting to startle the creature. After what felt like an eternity, the little Kythera stepped onto the jacket and settled down on the warm fabric. The coat still held Marcus's body heat, and the cub's shivering began to subside almost immediately. Seeing their siblings' reaction, the other 2 cubs crept forward. Within minutes, all 3 were curled up on Marcus's jacket, their purring filling the small enclosure with a sound like distant thunder. Marcus had never heard a Kythera purr before. According to the research files, adult Kythera only made that sound when they felt completely safe and content. Marcus quickly contacted the engineering department about the climate control malfunction. While he waited for the repair team, he stayed with the cubs, speaking to them in soft tones and making sure they remained warm. The smallest cub, who seemed to have claimed a spot directly over one of the jacket's pockets, opened its eyes and looked at Marcus again. This time, there was no fear in that amber gaze, only what Marcus could only describe as gratitude. When the engineering team arrived and began repairing the heating system, Marcus expected to retrieve his jacket once the cubs no longer needed it. But, as the lab's temperature returned to normal, the three young Kythera showed no interest in leaving their new favorite spot. They had claimed Marcus's jacket as their own, and no amount of coaxing from the xenobiology staff could convince them to abandon it. Dr. Ilan Voss, the Zephyrian researcher in charge of the Kythera specimens, was perplexed. "This behavior is unprecedented," she said, her crystalline features reflecting the lab's lights as she studied the cubs through the observation window. Kythera young typically show extreme neophobia. They should reject any foreign object in their environment, especially one carrying the scent of an unknown species. But the cubs had not only accepted Marcus's jacket, they had bonded with it. They slept on it, played on it, and refused to eat unless their meals were placed directly on the fabric. When the research team tried to replace the jacket with a standard warming pad, the cubs became agitated and distressed, their plaintive calls echoing through the lab until the jacket was returned. Marcus found himself making more frequent trips to Lab C7 than his duties strictly required. Each time he passed by the observation window, he would see the three cubs contentedly arranged on his jacket. The smallest one, whom he had begun to think of as Amber because of her distinctive eye color, always seemed to notice when he was watching. She would lift her head and look directly at him, as if acknowledging his presence. Word of the unusual situation spread throughout the research station. The Vorthan scientists were fascinated by what they saw as an anomaly in typical Kythera behavioral patterns. The Mel-Lori researchers began documenting the cubs' attachment to the jacket as a case study in interspecies bonding. Even the normally aloof Zephyrians took an interest, though they maintained their professional distance. But, for Marcus, it was simpler than all the scientific theories and behavioral analyses. 3 baby animals had been cold and scared, and he had helped them. The fact that they were destined to grow into some of the most dangerous predators in the galaxy didn't matter. In that moment, they had just been vulnerable creatures in need of warmth and comfort. As the days passed, Marcus noticed changes in the cubs beyond their attachment to his jacket. They seemed more alert and active than before. Their appetites improved, and they began to display the playful behaviors typical of healthy young Kythera. Dr. Voss noted in her reports that the cubs were developing at an accelerated rate compared to other specimens she had studied. "It's remarkable," she told Marcus during one of his cleaning rounds. "These cubs are thriving in ways we've never observed before. There's something about your jacket that provides them with more than just physical comfort. It's as if they've imprinted on the scent and presence associated with it." Marcus didn't fully understand the scientific implications, but he could see the difference in the cubs' demeanor. Where they had once been fearful and withdrawn, they now showed curiosity about their environment. They interacted more with each other and seemed generally more content. Amber, in particular, had become noticeably bolder, often approaching the front of the enclosure when Marcus was nearby. The situation took an interesting turn when Commander Thex Morningstar, the station's Vorthan administrator, decided to visit Lab C7 personally. Morningstar was an imposing figure, even by Vorthan standards. Her forearms were covered in intricate tattoos that denoted her military rank and scientific achievements. Her compound eyes missed nothing, and her reputation for efficiency was legendary throughout the consortium. "I want to understand this anomaly," Morningstar announced as she entered the lab with her usual entourage of assistants. "These cubs represent a significant investment in research resources. Their behavioral deviation from established patterns could compromise our study." Dr. Voss led the commander to the observation window, where the 3 cubs were engaged in their usual activities on Marcus's jacket. Amber was batting at one of the reflective safety strips, while her siblings wrestled playfully nearby. The moment they sensed the presence of strangers, all three cubs froze and turned toward the window. As you can see, Commander, Dr. Voss explained, they've formed an unprecedented attachment to this piece of human clothing. All attempts to substitute alternative comfort objects have been unsuccessful. The cubs become severely distressed when separated from the jacket for any length of time. Commander Morningstar studied the cubs with her analytical gaze. And the human responsible for this situation? Maintenance technician Chen, Dr. Voss replied. He discovered the climate control failure and provided temporary warming for the cubs using his work jacket. The attachment formed almost immediately. I see. Morningstar's expression was unreadable. Summon this Chen individual. I want to speak with him directly. Marcus felt a knot of anxiety in his stomach as he was called to Lab C7. He had heard stories about Commander Morningstar's legendary temper and her intolerance for disruptions to research protocols. As he entered the lab, he could feel the weight of her multiple-eyed gaze settling on him. Technician Chen, Morningstar's voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to absolute obedience. I understand you've created an unusual situation with our Kythera specimens. Yes, ma'am, Marcus replied, trying to keep his voice steady. The cubs were suffering from hypothermia due to the heating system failure. I provided temporary warming until repairs could be completed. And now they refuse to function normally without your jacket. It wasn't a question. Marcus glanced at the cubs, who had all turned their attention to him despite the presence of the intimidating Vorthan commander. Amber was pressed against the front of the enclosure, her amber eyes locked on his face. I never intended for them to become attached to it. I was just trying to help. Commander Morningstar followed his gaze to the cubs. For a long moment, she studied the small predators who were so fixated on the human technician. When she spoke again, her tone had shifted slightly. Do you understand what these creatures will become, Chen? Yes, ma'am. I've read the files. They're apex predators from Thesha Prime. Adults can grow to 3 meters and possess significant hunting capabilities. Indeed. And yet they've chosen to bond with an object carrying your scent. Morningstar's forearms moved in what Marcus recognized as a gesture of contemplation among Vorthans. Tell me, what do you know about Kythera's social structure? Marcus searched his memory of the research files. They're typically solitary hunters as adults, but cubs remain with family groups for the first 2 years of life. They're highly intelligent and form strong emotional bonds with their pack members. Correct. And these cubs appear to have included you, by proxy through your jacket, in their pack structure. Morningstar turned her full attention back to Marcus. This presents both an opportunity and a challenge for our research. The knot in Marcus's stomach tightened. Ma'am? The cub's behavioral adaptation could provide valuable insights into Kythera psychology and social development. However, maintaining this bond may require ongoing interaction with you. Morningstar paused, her compound eyes reflecting the lab's lighting. Are you willing to take on additional duties related to the care and observation of these specimens? Marcus looked at the 3 cubs, who seemed to sense the importance of the conversation taking place. Amber had climbed onto the highest point of his jacket, as if trying to get as close to him as possible despite the barrier of the enclosure. Her siblings flanked her, all 3 sets of amber eyes focused on him with an intensity that was both humbling and slightly unnerving. Yes, ma'am, Marcus replied without hesitation. I'll do whatever is needed to help with the research. Commander Morningstar's expression might have been approval, though it was difficult to tell with Vorthan features. Very well. Dr. Voss will coordinate with you regarding modified care protocols. I want detailed behavioral observations and regular progress reports. As the commander and her entourage left the lab, Dr. Voss approached Marcus with what might have been relief on her crystalline features. I must admit, I expected a different outcome from that meeting. Commander Morningstar is not typically sympathetic to protocol deviations. Marcus was still processing the unexpected turn of events. So the cubs can keep the jacket? It appears so. And you'll be working more closely with the research team from now on. Dr. Voss gestured toward the observation window. Your involvement has created a unique opportunity to study Kythera bonding behaviors in real time. This could be the most significant behavioral research to come out of this station. As Dr. Voss left to prepare the necessary paperwork, Marcus found himself alone with the cubs once again. He approached the observation window and placed his hand against the transparent barrier. Amber immediately came to the corresponding spot on her side of the enclosure, pressing her small paw against the surface where Marcus's hand rested. Through the barrier, human and Kythera cub regarded each other with mutual recognition. Marcus could see intelligence in those amber eyes, awareness that went beyond simple animal instinct. These creatures understood, on some level, that he had helped them when they were vulnerable. And they had chosen to trust him in return. The implications of what had happened began to settle in Marcus's mind. He was no longer just a maintenance worker invisible to the research staff. He had become an integral part of an unprecedented scientific study. More importantly, he had formed a connection with 3 alien beings who would grow into some of the most formidable predators in known space. As his shift ended and Marcus prepared to leave Lab C7, he took one last look at the cubs. They were settled on his jacket for the night, their purring a constant, comforting background sound. Amber opened her eyes as he watched, and, for a moment, Marcus felt a strange sense of completeness, as if something important had fallen into place. He didn't yet understand the full significance of what had begun that cold morning when he had given his jacket to 3 shivering cubs. But he could feel that his life on the research station, and perhaps his understanding of his place in the galaxy, was about to change in ways he couldn't imagine. #A shivering predator cub got the human janitor's code 3 weeks after the cubs had claimed Marcus's jacket. The research station received an unexpected visitor. The sleek diplomatic vessel that docked at the station's primary bay bore the insignia of the Kythera Territorial Council, a sight that sent ripples of excitement and nervous energy through the research staff. Ambassador Kythera stepped off the transport with the fluid grace that characterized all adult Kythera. Standing nearly 3 meters tall, her purple and gold fur held an almost metallic sheen in the station's lighting. Her amber eyes, so similar to those of the cubs Marcus had befriended, swept across the docking bay with predatory alertness. Every member of the greeting committee, from Commander Morningstar to the most junior researchers, felt the primal fear that evolution had hardwired into their species when faced with an apex predator. Only Marcus, watching from the maintenance level above the docking bay, felt something different. When Ambassador Kythera's gaze briefly met his, he saw intelligence and curiosity rather than the cold calculation of a hunter. Perhaps his time with the cubs had changed his perspective, or perhaps he simply recognized something familiar in those amber eyes. Commander Morningstar stepped forward with formal diplomatic precision. "Ambassador Kythera, welcome to Research Station Kepler 442b. We are honored by your visit." The ambassador's response came through her translation device, though her natural voice carried a subtle harmonic quality that seemed to resonate in the bones of everyone present. "Commander Morningstar, I have come to observe the young ones of my people who are housed at your facility. There are reports of unusual behavioral patterns that require investigation." Marcus felt his stomach drop. The cub's attachment to his jacket had been documented in official research reports, which apparently had made their way to Kythera authorities. He watched from above as the diplomatic party made its way through the station corridors, heading directly towards Section C. In Lab C7, Dr. Voss had prepared extensively for the ambassador's visit. The observation area had been expanded, and additional monitoring equipment had been installed to record every detail of the encounter. The cubs themselves seemed to sense that something significant was happening. They remained close to Marcus's jacket, but their posture was alert and watchful. When Ambassador Kythera entered the observation area, the effect on the cubs was immediate and dramatic. All 3 young Kythera stood at attention, their ears pricked forward and their tails held high. But, instead of the submissive posture that might be expected when facing an adult of their species, the cubs displayed confident, almost protective stances around Marcus's jacket. Amber, the smallest of the 3, positioned herself directly between the ambassador's viewing position and the jacket. Her siblings flanked her, creating a defensive formation that would have been impressive even from adult Kythera. "Fascinating," Ambassador Kythera murmured, her translation device rendering the harmonic complexities of her native language into standard galactic. "They are protecting the foreign object rather than seeking approval from a pack elder." Dr. Voss consulted her data pad nervously. Yes, Ambassador. This protective behavior has developed over the past few weeks. They demonstrate extreme territorial aggression toward anyone who attempts to remove or examine the jacket. Ambassador Kethera moved closer to the observation window, her massive frame imposing even in the spacious lab. The cubs' response was immediate. They pressed closer together, their amber eyes locked on the ambassador with unwavering determination. Low growls, barely audible through the enclosure's sound dampeners, rumbled in their throats. They are not afraid, the ambassador observed with what might have been approval. Even facing an adult of their own species, they choose to defend rather than submit. This is not typical behavior for cubs of their age. Commander Morningstar stepped forward. Our research indicates that the cubs have formed an unprecedented bond with the human garment. The behavioral modifications appear to be permanent. And the human responsible for this bond? Where is he? Marcus felt every eye in the room turn toward him as Dr. Voss gestured for him to join the group. Walking down to the main observation level under the direct gaze of Ambassador Kethera was one of the most intimidating experiences of his life. The ambassador was even more imposing up close, her presence filling the space with an aura of controlled power. I am Marcus Chen, he managed, his voice steadier than he felt. I'm the maintenance technician who found the cubs when their heating system failed. Ambassador Kethera studied him with those penetrating amber eyes. When she spoke, her tone carried a note of genuine curiosity. You provided warmth for cubs of a species not your own, knowing they would grow to become predators capable of killing you without effort. They were cold and scared, Marcus replied simply. They were just babies who needed help. The ambassador's response was a sound that the translation device couldn't render, a complex harmonic that seemed to convey surprise, approval, and something else Marcus couldn't identify. In the enclosure, the cubs had relaxed slightly at the sound of Marcus's voice, though they maintained their protective positions around his jacket. May I speak with the cubs directly? Ambassador Kethera asked. Dr. Voss activated the enclosure's communication system, and the ambassador began to speak in her native language. The sounds were unlike anything Marcus had ever heard, a complex mixture of harmonic tones, subtle growls, and rhythmic patterns that seemed to carry layers of meaning. The cubs' response was immediate and surprising. Instead of the respectful attention they might show to a pack elder, they began to vocalize in return, their young voices creating their own harmonic patterns. But, rather than addressing the ambassador directly, they seemed to be describing or defending something, with frequent glances toward the observation window where Marcus stood. The conversation between ambassador and cubs continued for several minutes, the adult Kithera's expressions becoming increasingly thoughtful as she listened to their responses. Finally, she turned back to the assembled research team. They speak of the one who brought warmth when cold threatened their lives, she said, her gaze settling on Marcus. They describe the scent of protection and comfort that clings to the cloth. Most significantly, they refer to you using familial terminology typically reserved for pack elders. Commander Morningstar's forearms moved in what Marcus now recognized as extreme surprise. They consider him family? More than that, Ambassador Kethera replied. They have designated him as a protector figure. In Kithera culture, this is a sacred bond formed only in circumstances of life-threatening danger and selfless aid. It is unprecedented for this bond to form between species. The implications hit Marcus like a physical blow. These cubs didn't just like his jacket or associate it with comfort. They had imprinted on him as a parental figure, despite being a different species entirely. The weight of that responsibility was staggering. What does this mean for the research program? Dr. Voss asked, her crystalline features reflecting her concern about the project's future. Ambassador Kethera was quiet for a long moment, her amber gaze moving between Marcus and the cubs who were now pressed against the front of their enclosure, trying to get closer to their human protector. It means that these cubs have chosen their path in a way that defies all our understanding of Kithera development. They have bonded across species lines with a determination that will not be broken. She turned to Marcus with the full weight of her attention. Human Marcus Chen, do you understand what you have become to these young ones? Marcus looked at the three cubs, who were watching him with such trust and affection that it made his chest tight. I think they see me as someone who will take care of them. Yes,
but, more than that, you have become their chosen family.
When they reach maturity, they will still carry this bond. It will influence every decision they make, every relationship they form.
Ambassador Kethera's voice carried both warning and wonder. You have created something that has never existed before in our history. The weight of that statement settled over the laboratory like a heavy blanket.
Marcus had given his coat to 3 cold cubs, expecting nothing more than to help them survive a few hours. Instead, he had fundamentally altered their development and created a bond that would last their entire lives.
What happens now? Marcus asked.
Ambassador Kethera gestured toward the cubs, who were now vocalizing softly, their voices carrying the harmonic patterns Marcus had come to associate with contentment.
Now, you must decide if you are willing to accept the responsibility you have undertaken.
These cubs will need guidance as they grow, and they have chosen you as their guide.
Commander Morningstar stepped forward. Ambassador, surely you're not suggesting that a human could adequately guide the development of Kithera cubs? I am not suggesting anything, Commander. I am stating what the cubs themselves have declared. The ambassador's tone carried finality. They have made their choice. The question is whether the human will honor it.
Marcus felt the weight of every gaze in the room, but his attention was focused on the 3 cubs who had turned his simple act of kindness into something far more profound. Amber pressed her paw against the barrier again, her amber eyes holding his with unwavering trust.
I'll do whatever they need, Marcus said quietly. But I don't know how to raise Kithera cubs.
Few do, even among our own people, Ambassador Kethera replied with what might have been approval. But you have already proven that you possess the most important quality, the willingness to put their welfare above your own comfort. Over the following days, Marcus found his routine completely transformed. Instead of general maintenance duties, he was assigned to work directly with Dr. Voss and her team on the Kithera research project. His new responsibilities included daily interaction with the cubs, monitoring their development, and learning about Kithera culture and psychology. Ambassador Kethera remained at the station for an extended period, serving as both cultural advisor and observer. She seemed genuinely fascinated by the unprecedented interspecies bond that had formed, and her presence lent legitimacy to the research project that had previously been seen as a minor behavioral anomaly. Marcus quickly learned that caring for rapidly growing Kithera cubs was unlike anything he had ever experienced. Their intelligence developed at an astonishing rate, and they began to understand basic galactic standard within days of focused exposure. More importantly, they demonstrated problem-solving abilities that surpassed many adult members of other species. But it was their emotional development that truly amazed the research team. The cubs showed empathy, loyalty, and protective instincts that were typically associated with much older Kithera. When Marcus was away from the lab for extended periods, they became visibly distressed. When he returned, their greeting calls could be heard throughout Section C. Dr. Voss documented everything with scientific rigor, but even she couldn't hide her amazement at what they were observing. The cubs are developing emotional intelligence at an accelerated rate, she reported during one of the daily briefings. Their bond with Marcus appears to be catalyzing cognitive and social growth beyond anything in our previous research. The cubs had also begun to outgrow Marcus's original jacket. Their increasing size and activity meant that all 3 could no longer comfortably share the garment that had started their unusual journey. But when the research team attempted to provide additional comfort objects, the cubs' response was swift and decisive. Amber, now clearly established as the leader of the small pack, had claimed the jacket's left sleeve as her personal territory. Her brother, whom Marcus had begun calling Storm because of his gray markings, had taken possession of the right sleeve. The 3rd cub, Golden, had claimed the jacket's main body. But they showed no interest in any additional items, preferring to share their chosen spaces rather than expand their territory. They're not just attached to the jacket itself, Marcus realized during one of his observation sessions. They're maintaining connection to each other through it. It's like their family home. Ambassador Kethera nodded approvingly. You begin to understand Kithera psychology. Territory is not about space, it is about belonging. The cubs have established their first family territory around the symbol of your protection. This insight led to a breakthrough in understanding Kithera social development. previous research had assumed that cubs established territorial behaviors only after physical maturity. But Marcus's cubs were demonstrating that emotional security could trigger these behaviors much earlier, leading to accelerated social development. The implications extended far beyond academic research. Ambassador Kethera began to discuss the possibility of formal diplomatic relations between the Kithera Territorial Council and human space. The unprecedented bond formed between Marcus and the cubs had demonstrated that interspecies emotional connections were possible on a level previously thought impossible. "Your species has shown something remarkable," she told Marcus during one of their private conversations. "Most species in the galaxy maintain cordial relations based on mutual benefit and shared interests. But you risked your own comfort to help creatures who could never reciprocate, simply because they needed aid." Marcus found himself at the center of discussions that went far beyond his original role as a maintenance worker. Diplomats, researchers, and cultural analysts from multiple species began visiting the station to observe the cubs and their unusual development. But, through it all, Marcus never lost sight of what was truly important: 3 young creatures who had chosen him as their protector and guide. The cubs, now approaching the size of large dogs, had begun to show the first signs of their predatory heritage. Their reflexes were lightning fast, their strength was increasing daily, and their hunting instincts were beginning to emerge during play sessions. But their responses to Marcus remained unchanged: complete trust, unwavering loyalty, and a protective instinct that was already becoming formidable. When Dr. Kells, a behavioral psychologist from the Zephyrian Institute, suggested that Marcus should begin reducing his contact with the cubs to prevent overdependence, Amber's response was swift and decisive. The young Kithera positioned herself between Dr. Kells and Marcus, her growl carrying harmonics that made every being in the lab take an involuntary step backward. "I think they've made their position clear on that suggestion," Marcus said with a smile as he gently placed his hand on Amber's head, immediately calming the protective cub. Ambassador Kethera observed the interaction with intense interest. "She is already showing pack leadership qualities. In Kithera culture, this would make her the primary heir to family territory and status. She has chosen to extend that protection to you." The realization that Marcus had essentially become the adopted father of a future Kithera pack leader was both humbling and terrifying. These cubs would grow into beings capable of incredible destruction, but they had chosen him as their moral and emotional guide. The responsibility was unlike anything he had ever imagined when he had simply tried to help 3 cold, frightened babies. As his second month of expanded duties came to an end, Marcus reflected on how dramatically his life had changed. He was no longer invisible to the station's research staff. Instead, he was a central figure in what was becoming the most significant behavioral research project in recent galactic history. More importantly, he had found a purpose that went far beyond his original job description. The cubs had grown strong and healthy, their development exceeding all expectations for their age group. But they had also maintained their fundamental bond with the human who had first shown them kindness. Every morning, they would greet him with harmonic calls that had become a familiar sound throughout Section C. Every evening, they would settle down on their shared jacket, content in the knowledge that their protector would return the next day. Marcus understood now that his simple act of compassion had created something unprecedented in galactic history. He had become the bridge between species, the proof that empathy could transcend biological boundaries. But, more than that, he had become exactly what the cubs had always believed him to be: their family. #A shivering predator cub got the human janitor's coat 6 months after the cubs had first claimed Marcus's jacket. Research station Kepler 442b faced a crisis that would test every bond that had been formed within its walls. The early warning systems began screaming alerts at 0347 station time, jolting the night shift into immediate action as proximity sensors detected an approaching vessel that wasn't responding to standard identification protocols. Marcus was awakened in his quarters by the emergency klaxons, the sound that every station resident hoped never to hear. He dressed quickly and made his way toward Section C, his first concern being for the cubs who would be frightened by the unfamiliar noise and commotion. As he moved through the corridors, he passed crew members hurrying to emergency stations with grim expressions. In the command center, Commander Morningstar was coordinating the station's response with her characteristic efficiency. The main display showed a sleek warship of unknown design approaching at high speed, its weapon systems powered but not yet targeted. The vessel's hull bore markings that sent a chill through every member of the command staff who recognized them.
Hegemony Raiders, Lieutenant Commander Sachs whispered, her Mellory features pale with fear. What are they doing this far into consortium space?
The Hegemony was a loose confederation of pirate fleets and rogue military units that operated in the contested territories beyond the galactic frontier. They were known for their brutal efficiency and their complete disregard for diplomatic immunity. Research stations like Kepler 442b, with their valuable equipment and isolated locations, were considered prime targets. Commander Morningstar's voice cut through the tension.
All research staff to emergency shelters. Security teams to defensive positions. And, someone get me Ambassador Kethera immediately.
The Kithera ambassador arrived within minutes, her massive frame moving with predatory grace even in crisis conditions.
Her amber eyes took in the tactical display with rapid assessment. How many ships?
Just one, but it's heavily armed, Commander Morningstar replied. Our defensive systems can hold them off for a while, but if they're willing to sustain losses, they'll eventually break through. Marcus reached Lab C7 to find the Cubs in a state of extreme agitation. The emergency klaxons had triggered their predatory instincts, and all three young Kithera were pacing their enclosure with restless energy. Their amber eyes were dilated, their ears flattened against their heads, and low growls rumbled continuously in their throats. It's okay, Marcus said as he entered the lab, but his voice did little to calm them. The Cubs could sense danger in a way that went beyond the noise and flashing lights.
Their evolutionary heritage as apex predators was responding to threats that the station's other inhabitants couldn't even detect.
Amber approached the front of the enclosure, her gaze locked on Marcus with unusual intensity. When she vocalized, the harmonic patterns were different from anything he had heard before, complex and urgent in a way that made his skin prickle. Dr. Voss arrived moments later, her crystalline features reflecting the lab's emergency lighting. Marcus, you need to get to the emergency shelters. The raiders will be within weapons range in less than 10 minutes. I can't leave them like this, Marcus replied, gesturing toward the Cubs.
They're terrified. They're animals in a research facility, Dr. Voss said firmly. Your safety is more important than their comfort.
But, as the words left her mouth, the Cubs' response was immediate and dramatic. All three young Kithera moved to the front of their enclosure, their voices joining in a harmonic call that made the laboratory's equipment vibrate.
It was a sound of challenge, of protection, of absolute determination.
Ambassador Kethera arrived at that moment, having followed Marcus from the command center. She listened to the Cubs' vocalizations with growing amazement, her own expression shifting to something approaching awe. They are not calling in fear, she said quietly.
They are declaring protection. They know their chosen family member is in danger, and they are responding as adult Kithera would in defense of their territory.
The implications of her words hit Marcus immediately. The Cubs were trying to protect him, but they were trapped in their enclosure while an unknown enemy approached the station. Their frustration was building to dangerous levels.
Can we let them out? Marcus asked. Just into the lab? They need to feel like they can do something.
Dr. Voss shook her head emphatically.
Absolutely not.
They're still wild animals, and stress could make them unpredictable. The containment protocols exist for good reason.
But Ambassador Kethera was studying the Cubs with intense concentration.
Actually, Dr. Voss, I believe the greater risk lies in keeping them contained.
Young Kithera who are prevented from protecting their pack members can develop severe psychological trauma.
In some cases, they become permanently aggressive and unstable. The debate was interrupted by an announcement from the command center.
All personnel, the approaching vessel has opened fire. Defensive shields are holding, but we are officially under attack.
This is not a drill. In the enclosure, the Cubs' agitation reached a new level. They began to pace in tight circles, their claws leaving deep gouges in the floor of their habitat.
Their vocalizations became more urgent, more demanding.
Marcus could see the intelligence in their amber eyes, could feel their desperate need to respond to the threat they knew was approaching.
The shields won't hold forever, Ambassador Kethera said grimly. And, when they fail, these Cubs will know. They will sense the danger to their pack member long before any of us realize how serious the situation has become.
Marcus made a decision that went against every safety protocol he had been taught.
Open the enclosure.
Dr. Voss stared at him in shock.
Marcus, you can't be serious.
They could kill you.
They could, Marcus agreed, approaching the enclosure's control panel. But they won't. They're my family, and I'm theirs.
If this is how it ends, then, at least we'll face it together. Before Dr. Voss could stop him, Marcus activated the emergency release. The enclosure's door slid open with a soft hiss, and, for a moment, nobody moved. The cubs stood frozen at the threshold, their eyes wide with surprise at the sudden freedom they had been granted.
Amber was the first to move.
She stepped out of the enclosure with careful dignity, her amber gaze never leaving Marcus's face.
Storm and Golden followed, the three cubs moving in perfect formation toward their human protector.
But, instead of the chaos that Dr. Voss had feared, the cubs' behavior became immediately calmer. They arranged themselves around Marcus in a protective triangle, their bodies pressed against his legs in a gesture of both comfort-seeking and protection offering. Their vocalizations shifted to the harmonic purring he had first heard months ago, though underlying tones suggested they remained alert for danger.
Ambassador Kethera watched the interaction with fascination.
Remarkable. They have established a defensive formation around you, but their stress levels have decreased significantly now that they can fulfill their protective instincts. The station shuddered slightly as another salvo struck the defensive shields. The cubs' heads turned in unison toward the source of the disturbance, their ears pricked forward and their bodies tense with readiness. But they maintained their positions around Marcus, creating a living barrier between him and any potential threat. Dr. Voss was checking her communication device when her expression suddenly changed. Command Center is reporting shield failure in Section 7. The raiders have breached the outer hull.
The implications were clear.
The raiders had landed and were likely making their way through the station's corridors.
Standard protocol called for all non-essential personnel to remain in secure locations until security teams could deal with the threat. But the cubs' response suggested they had no intention of following standard protocol.
Storm, the largest of the three, moved to the lab's main entrance and took up a guard position. His posture was that of a sentry, alert and ready to respond to any threat that might appear. Golden positioned herself near the secondary exit, while Amber remained close to Marcus, her amber eyes constantly scanning for danger.
They've established perimeter security, Ambassador Kethera observed with evident pride.
These cubs are demonstrating tactical thinking beyond their years. They understand the nature of the threat and are responding with coordinated defense strategies. The sound of weapons fire echoed through the station's corridors, muffled by distance but clearly audible.
The cubs' reaction was immediate.
Their harmonic vocalization shifted to lower frequencies that seemed to resonate through the station's hull. It was a sound Marcus had never heard before, but its meaning was unmistakable, a challenge to anyone who might threaten their territory.
We should move to a more secure location, Dr. Voss urged.
The emergency bunkers are designed to withstand. Her words were cut off by the sound of the lab's main door being forced open. Three figures in combat armor burst through the entrance, their weapons raised and their intentions clearly hostile. Marcus's heart stopped as he recognized the distinctive gear of hegemony raiders, notorious for their brutal efficiency and complete disregard for civilian lives. What happened next occurred so quickly that Marcus's human reflexes could barely follow the action. Storm launched himself from his guard position with speed that defied his size, his young body already demonstrating the incredible agility that would characterize his adult form. The leading raider had just enough time to begin turning his weapon before Storm's claws raked across his armored chest, sending him crashing into the wall. Golden and Amber moved as one unit, their formation designed to drive the remaining raiders away from Marcus while cutting off their retreat. The second raider managed to fire his weapon, but the energy beam went wide as Golden slammed into his legs, bringing him down with devastating efficiency. The third raider found himself facing Amber, whose small size belied the fury in her amber eyes.
The entire engagement lasted less than 10 seconds.
Three heavily armed raiders, veterans of countless boarding actions, had been neutralized by cubs who were barely 6 months old. Marcus stared in amazement at the young Kithera who had just demonstrated why their species was feared throughout the galaxy. But the cub's attention had already shifted back to him. They moved to his side with concerned vocalizations, checking him for injury with gentle nuzzles. Their transformation from devastating predators back to protective family members was complete and instantaneous. Ambassador Kethara spoke into her communication device in rapid Kithara, her words carrying harmonic undertones that Marcus couldn't interpret. Within minutes, the lab was filled with station security personnel, but their primary concern wasn't the disabled raiders. They were staring in awe at 3 Kithara cubs who had just proven that interspecies loyalty could transcend every expectation. Commander Morningstar arrived shortly after, her forearms moving in gestures that Marcus now recognized as extreme surprise. "The raiders have been repelled," she announced. "But, I understand we have a more immediate situation to address." She looked at the cubs, who had arranged themselves in their protective formation around Marcus, then, at the 3 unconscious raiders who had learned firsthand why Kithara were considered apex predators. "I assume there's an explanation for how research specimens managed to disable armed combatants?" "They were protecting their pack member," Ambassador Kethara replied with evident pride. "These cubs have demonstrated loyalty and tactical intelligence that exceeds anything in our historical records. They chose to defend their chosen family over their own safety." The aftermath of the raid brought significant changes to Research Station Kepler 442b. The Cubs' actions had not only saved Marcus's life but had also demonstrated capabilities that revolutionized galactic understanding of Kithara development. The 3 raiders, when they regained consciousness, spoke of facing creatures that moved like shadows and struck with precision that seemed impossible for their age. More importantly, the Cubs had proven that their bond with Marcus transcended simple attachment. They had risked their lives to protect him, displaying loyalty and courage that impressed even Ambassador Kethara. Their actions became the foundation for new protocols regarding interspecies relationships and the potential for emotional bonds that crossed biological boundaries. In the weeks following the raid, delegations from across the galaxy visited the station to study the Cubs and their unprecedented development. The 3 young Kithara, now heroes in their own right, continued to grow and learn under Marcus's guidance. But they also retained their fundamental truth: they were a family bound not by genetics or species, but by love, loyalty, and mutual protection. Marcus's jacket, still serving as their shared territory and comfort object, became a symbol recognized throughout consortium space. It represented the possibility of understanding between species, the power of simple kindness, and the reality that families could be chosen rather than born. As the Cubs approached their first full year of life, their intelligence and emotional depth continued to amaze everyone who observed them. They had learned to communicate in basic galactic standard, could solve complex puzzles, and demonstrated empathy that extended beyond their own species. But, most remarkably, they had maintained their absolute devotion to the human who had first shown them warmth when they were cold and scared. Amber, now clearly established as the pack's leader, had claimed a permanent spot on Marcus's left shoulder during their daily walks through the station. Storm and Golden flanked them, creating a formation that was both protective and familial. Other station personnel, who had once barely acknowledged Marcus's existence, now stepped aside with respectful recognition of the human who had earned the loyalty of 3 Kithara. Ambassador Kethara prepared to return to the Kithara Territorial Council with reports that would reshape diplomatic relations throughout the galaxy. But, before her departure, she had one final conversation with Marcus in Lab C7, where it had all begun. "You understand that these Cubs will live for centuries," she said, her amber eyes serious. "Their bond with you will influence every aspect of their lives, every decision they make, every relationship they form. You have created something that will outlast your own lifetime." Marcus watched the 3 Cubs playing on their shared jacket, their movements graceful and coordinated even in their seemingly casual interaction. "I know. Sometimes I wonder if I did the right thing." "You did the only thing your nature allowed," Ambassador Kethara replied. "You saw creatures in need and provided help without thought of reward or consequence. That simple act of compassion has changed the course of galactic history." She gestured toward the Cubs, who had noticed their conversation and were watching with intelligent attention. "These young ones will carry the memory of human kindness for their entire lives. They will teach their own offspring about the species that showed them warmth when they were cold. You have created a bridge between our peoples that will span generations." As Ambassador Kethara prepared to leave, Amber approached with something in her mouth. It was a small piece of fabric that had been carefully torn from Marcus's jacket, worked and shaped by claws into something resembling a small token. She placed it at the ambassador's feet with ceremonial gravity. A gift for the journey home, Marcus interpreted, understanding the gesture despite its unprecedented nature. Ambassador Kethera accepted the token with formal dignity, her own harmonic vocalizations carrying tones of respect and gratitude. I will carry this reminder of what is possible when species choose understanding over fear. Months passed, and Marcus's role at the station evolved into something unprecedented in galactic research history. He became the first human specialist in interspecies emotional development, his experience with the Cubs forming the foundation for new protocols and understanding. Research teams from dozens of worlds visited to study his methods and observe the continuing development of his unusual family. The Cubs, now approaching adult size, had maintained their bond with both Marcus and his original jacket despite their increasing independence. They had learned to navigate the complex social structures of the multi-species research station, earned the respect of beings who had initially seen them as mere specimens, and proven that intelligence and emotional depth were not limited by species boundaries. But, perhaps most remarkably, they had retained their fundamental truth: they were a family chosen by circumstance and bound by love. Every morning, they would gather on Marcus's jacket for their daily planning session, their harmonic vocalizations now understood by the station's translation systems as sophisticated discussions of goals, concerns, and observations about their shared world. Dr. Voss, who had initially opposed Marcus's involvement with the Cubs, had become one of the strongest advocates for interspecies emotional research. Her papers on Kythera development in cross-species family structures were becoming required reading in xenopsychology programs throughout the galaxy. What we've observed here challenges every assumption about emotional bonding and species limitations, she told a gathering of researchers from the Galactic Scientific Consortium. These Cubs have demonstrated that family structures can transcend biological boundaries when based on genuine care and mutual protection. Marcus, listening to the presentation from his position near the Cubs' enclosure, smiled as he watched his three charges. They had grown into magnificent young adults, their purple and gold fur gleaming with health, their amber eyes bright with intelligence. But, when they looked at him, he still saw the three frightened babies who had needed warmth on a cold morning. Amber approached him as the presentation concluded, her movements now carrying the fluid grace of an adult Kythera but her expression still holding the trust and affection he remembered from their first meeting. She pressed her massive head against his shoulder in a gesture that had become their traditional greeting. "Ready for evening patrol?" Marcus asked, using the phrase that had become their routine for walks through the station. Her harmonic response, translated by the laboratory systems, came through as, "ready to guard our territory with our chosen pack leader." As they prepared for their daily walk, Marcus reflected on the incredible journey that had begun with a simple act of compassion. He had given his coat to three cold Cubs, never imagining that he was creating a family that would challenge the galaxy's understanding of what was possible between species. The Cubs had grown into powerful adults who commanded respect throughout the station, but they had never forgotten the human who had first shown them kindness. Their loyalty had been tested in combat, their intelligence had been proven through years of observation, and their emotional depth had revolutionized scientific understanding of interspecies relationships. But, for Marcus, the most important truth remained unchanged: they were his family, and he was theirs. The jacket that had started their journey together still served as their shared territory, a symbol of the bond that had grown from a moment of simple human compassion into something that would influence galactic civilization for generations to come. As they walked through the corridors of Research Station Kepler 442b, Marcus couldn't help but smile at how far they had all traveled from that cold morning when three shivering Cubs had claimed his jacket and, in doing so, had claimed his heart. The galaxy was a vast and often dangerous place, but he faced it with complete confidence, protected and beloved by the most formidable predators in known space, who would always see him as the one who had brought warmth when they were cold and scared.